Blood on the moors. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when I found my brother's body in the old quarry outside Whitby. The police called it an accident, said he'd been drinking, lost his footing in the dark, tumbled 40 feet onto the rocks below. But I knew better. Tom hadn't touched a drop in 5 years, not since our father's funeral, not since he'd promised me he'd get his life sorted. I stood now in the car park of the Red Lion, watching through the rain-streaked windscreen as 3 men stumbled out into the night, their laughter cutting through the sound of the downpour. I recognized the tallest one immediately. Marcus Thornton, with his expensive jacket and that smug smile that had always made me want to put my fist through his teeth. He'd been Tom's business partner once, before everything went wrong. I waited until they'd separated, until Marcus was alone, fumbling with his car keys under the flickering streetlight. I stepped out of my car, pulling my hood up, and crossed the empty car park. Marcus. He spun around, squinting through the rain. Recognition dawned slowly on his face, followed by something else. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Sarah. Christ, I'm sorry about Tom. Terrible thing. Was it? What? Terrible. Was it terrible for you? Marcus took a step back. I don't know what you're implying, but... You were there that night. Don't lie to me. I've seen the CCTV from the petrol station. Your car, heading up toward the quarry, 20 minutes before Tom died. The color drained from his face. You need to leave this alone. Did you push him, Marcus? Or did you just watch while someone else did? He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Listen to me very carefully. Your brother made some very stupid choices. He stole from people who don't forgive. What happened to him, it was always going to happen. And if you keep digging, the same thing will happen to you. I jerked my arm free. Then I suppose we both know where this is going. I walked back to my car, my heart hammering, but I didn't look back. I'd gotten what I needed. Confirmation. The rest would come. 2 days later, Marcus Thornton's body was found in his garage, slumped over the steering wheel of his Mercedes, engines still running, carbon monoxide having done its quiet work. The police called it suicide. Depression, they said. Guilt over his business partner's death. But I knew better. I'd learned the trick from a crime novel Tom used to read. How to jimmy a garage door from the outside, how to make it look locked from within. How to make murder look like despair. I felt nothing as I read the news. No triumph, no remorse. Just a cold, hollow satisfaction, like checking an item off a list. There were still 2 more names on that list. I'd spent the week after Tom's funeral piecing it together. I'd gone through his flat, found the laptop he'd hidden behind the loose board in his bedroom, the one the police had somehow missed. The emails told me everything. How Marcus and his associates, Dean Walsh and Billy Cooper, had been running a money laundering scheme through Tom's legitimate construction business. How Tom had discovered it, threatened to go to the police. How they'd offered him a cut to keep quiet, and when he'd refused, they'd decided he was a liability. Billy Cooper was easier. He lived alone in a council flat in Scarborough, spent most of his evenings at the bookies, and had a taste for prescription painkillers he bought off a dealer behind the Tesco. I watched him for 3 days, learned his patterns, his routines. I watched him stumble home drunk on Thursday night, watched him drop his keys twice before managing to open his door. On Friday night, I was waiting in his flat when he came home. He didn't see me at first, hidden as I was in the darkness of his bedroom. I'd spent the afternoon there, among his dirty clothes and empty beer cans, waiting with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose. When he finally collapsed on his bed, already half unconscious, I emerged. I'd brought the pills with me, the same painkillers he was already addicted to, but I'd crushed enough to stop his heart. Mixed them into a bottle of cheap vodka. It was surprisingly easy to pour it down his throat, to hold his nose until he swallowed reflexively, his body too drunk to properly resist. By the time he realized something was wrong, it was too late. His eyes widened, his hands clutched at his chest, and I watched with the same cold detachment I'd felt at Marcus's garage. "This is for Tom," I whispered, though I wasn't sure he could hear me anymore. I left the bottle beside him, wiped down every surface I'd touched, and walked out into the night. The rain had started again, washing away any trace of my presence. The police found him the next morning. Drug overdose, they concluded. Accidental, probably. A tragedy, but not entirely surprising for a man with his habits. That left Dean Walsh. Dean was different from the others. He was careful, paranoid even. He had security cameras on his house in Helmsley, drove a different route to work every day, and rarely went anywhere alone. But I'd learned that everyone had a weakness, a moment when they let their guard down. For Dean, it was his Friday afternoon visits to his elderly mother in Pickering. I followed him there one gray afternoon in early November, keeping several cars back, watching as he parked outside a neat terraced house and let himself in with his own key. I drove past, circled the block, and parked where I could watch the house. I'd wait as long as it took. But as I sat there, engine off, watching the light rain speckle my windscreen, something shifted inside me. I thought about Tom, about the last conversation we'd had. He'd been excited, talking about getting out, starting fresh somewhere else. Maybe Manchester, he'd said, or even London. Somewhere big enough to disappear in, to start over. He'd asked if I'd come with him. I'd said no. I had my job at the hospital, my flat, my life in York. I couldn't just leave. And now he was gone, and I was sitting in a car in Pickering, planning my third murder. The realization hit me like cold water. Third murder. When had I become this? Tom wouldn't have wanted this. He'd spent 5 years trying to become better than the person he'd been, trying to build something legitimate and good. And here I was, destroying everything, becoming exactly the kind of person he'd been trying to escape. I sat there for a long time, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I thought about driving home, about letting it go, about trying to remember Tom for who he'd been rather than destroying myself in the name of revenge. But then Dean came out of his mother's house, and I saw his face. He was laughing at something, checking his phone, completely at ease. Tom was dead, Marcus was dead, Billy was dead, and Dean Walsh was laughing. The cold feeling came back, drowning out everything else. I followed him as he drove out of Pickering, heading north on the A170. The road was quiet, just a handful of cars, the moors stretching out dark and empty on either side. I'd driven this road 1,000 times. I knew every curve, every hidden turnoff. I accelerated, closing the distance between us. There was a particular stretch, I knew, just past the turn for Lockton. A sharp bend, a steep drop on one side, no barrier. Tom had always hated that section, said it was an accident waiting to happen. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. My car pulled alongside Dean's, and I saw his face turn toward me, confusion first, then recognition, then fear as I wrenched my will to the right. The impact was tremendous. Dean's car veered wildly, tires screaming, and for a moment I thought he'd regain control. But the wet road betrayed him, and his car skidded sideways, smashing through the low stone wall and tumbling down the embankment in a shriek of twisting metal. I slammed on my brakes, my car fishtailing to a stop in the middle of the road. I sat there, breathing hard, my hands locked on the wheel. In the rear-view mirror, I could see the gap in the wall, could see smoke rising from somewhere down the slope. I should drive away. That had been the plan. Make it look like an accident, be nowhere near when they found him. But my body wouldn't move. I sat frozen, watching the smoke darken the gray sky. And then, impossibly, I saw movement. Dean, crawling up the embankment, his face bloody, one arm hanging at a wrong angle. But alive. Still alive. I got out of the car. I could hear another vehicle approaching in the distance, still far off but getting closer. I had maybe 2 minutes. I walked to the edge of the embankment and looked down. Dean saw me. Through the blood and the pain, his eyes found mine, and I saw the terror in them. He knew. He understood. Please, he choked out. Please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Tom. It was Marcus's idea. I tried to stop them. Please. The other car was getting closer now. I could see its headlights, maybe a mile away on the straight stretch before the bend. I looked at Dean, broken and bleeding on the hillside, and felt something crack inside my chest. This wasn't justice. This was just more death, more waste. Tom wouldn't come back. Nothing would change. And I would become something irredeemable. I pulled out my phone and dialed 999. Emergency services, which service do you need? Ambulance. There's been an accident on the A170, just past the Lockton turn. A car's gone off the road. The driver's badly hurt. I gave the details, then ended the call. Dean was staring at me, not understanding, not trusting. The other car was nearly upon us now, slowing as it saw my car stopped in the road. I looked at Dean one last time. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them what you did to my brother. Or I'll come back and finish this. Then I got in my car and drove away, leaving Dean Walsh to face whatever came next. The story made the local news. A businessman seriously injured in a road accident on the moors, in critical condition at Scarborough Hospital. What didn't make the news, what I only learned weeks later through a friend who knew someone in the police, was that Dean Walsh had started talking. About Marcus Thornton, about Billy Cooper, about what they'd done to Tom Winters. About the money laundering, the threats, the night at the quarry when they'd gotten Tom drunk and pushed him over the edge. The police were calling it a breakthrough in an ongoing investigation. Marcus's suicide and Billy's overdose were being re-examined. And I, visiting my brother's grave with flowers on a cold December morning, was being watched by two detectives in an unmarked car at the cemetery gates. I knew they were there. I'd expected them. Part of me was almost relieved. I laid the flowers down, chrysanthemums because they'd been Tom's favorite, and stood looking at the headstone. I'm sorry, I whispered. I tried. I really tried to be what you needed me to be. But I couldn't let them get away with it. The headstone offered no absolution, no forgiveness. Just cold granite and carved letters. Thomas James Winters. Beloved brother. Gone too soon. I heard the car doors open behind me, heard the footsteps on the gravel path. I didn't turn around, not yet. I had a few more seconds, and I wanted to spend them here, with Tom, before everything else began. Sarah Winters? The voice was male, professional, carefully neutral. Yes. Detective Inspector Collins. This is Detective Sergeant Hayes. We'd like you to come with us, answer some questions about Marcus Thornton and Billy Cooper. I finally turned to face them. Two middle-aged men in plain clothes, their faces grave. Collins was holding something. A clear evidence bag with a small piece of fabric inside. We found this in Marcus Thornton's garage, Collins said. Fibers from a woman's coat. They don't match anything his wife or daughter owns. But we think they might match yours. I looked at the bag, then at the detectives, then back at Tom's grave. I could deny it. I could lawyer up, stay silent, make them prove every detail. But suddenly, I was so very tired. He killed my brother, I said quietly. All three of them. They murdered Tom and made it look like an accident. Hayes started to say something about my right to silence, about solicitors and formal interviews, but Collins held up a hand to stop him. He was watching me with something that might have been pity. Let's talk about this at the station, he said gently. Come on. They led me to the car, and I went without resistance. As we drove away from the cemetery, I looked back one last time at Tom's grave, at the flowers bright against the gray stone. I'd failed him in the end. Failed to get proper justice, failed to let it go, failed to be the sister he deserved. But at least he wouldn't be forgotten. At least people would know what had really happened to him. It was cold comfort as the police car carried me toward whatever came next, but it was the only comfort I had left. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. The forensic evidence, the CCTV footage that placed me near Marcus's house the night he died, the pills missing from the hospital where I worked that matched those found in Billy Cooper's system, the paint transfer on my car that matched Dean Walsh's vehicle. And through it all, Dean's testimony, delivered from a wheelchair, his injuries still healing. My barrister tried his best. He talked about temporary insanity, about the grief of losing a brother, about the miscarriage of justice that had let Tom's killers walk free. He called expert witnesses to talk about PTSD and trauma. But the facts were damning, and I refused to lie. Yes, I'd killed Marcus. Yes, I'd killed Billy. Yes, I'd tried to kill Dean. The jury took 6 hours to reach their verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. The judge, an elderly woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much human suffering, regarded me from the bench with something that might have been understanding. "Miss Winters," she said, "the court acknowledges the terrible loss you suffered and the apparent failure of the justice system to properly investigate your brother's death. However, we cannot condone taking the law into your own hands. We cannot allow vigilante justice, no matter how sympathetic the circumstances. To do so would be to abandon the very foundations of civilized society." She paused, and in that moment, I saw something flicker across the judge's face. Recognition, perhaps, of the impossible situation, the no-win scenario. "On the count of the murder of Marcus Thornton, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. On the count of the murder of William Cooper, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years, to run concurrently. On the count of the attempted murder of Dean Walsh, I sentence you to 12 years, also concurrent. You will serve a minimum of 18 years before being eligible for parole." The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of voices. Journalists shouting questions, Tom's friends crying out in support, someone from Marcus's family screaming about justice. The judge's gavel cracked down like a gunshot, demanding order. I barely heard any of it. 18 years. I'd be nearly 50 when I got out, if I got out. More than half my life, gone. But as the guards led me away, back down to the cells, I found I couldn't regret it. Not entirely. Marcus and Billy were dead. Dean would carry his scars for the rest of his life. And Tom's name had been cleared. It was a terrible price to pay, but it was the price I'd chosen. The cell was small and cold and smelled of disinfectant and despair. I sat on the narrow bed and stared at the gray wall. This would be my view for 18 years. Gray walls, gray days, gray future. I thought about Tom, about the last time I'd seen him alive. We'd met for Sunday lunch at our favorite pub in York, the one by the river. He'd been so happy, so full of plans. He'd talked about the business, about finally getting clear of the debts our father had left. About maybe meeting someone, settling down. About the future. And I had been distracted, checking my phone, worried about a patient at the hospital. I'd barely listened. I'd taken for granted that there would be more Sundays, more lunches, more time. There was a knock on the cell door, and it swung open. A prison officer stood there, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. "You have a visitor," she said. "Your solicitor." I stood and followed her through the maze of corridors to a small interview room. But it wasn't my solicitor waiting there. It was Dean Walsh, still in his wheelchair, his face a roadmap of scars from the accident. I stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" Dean looked up at me, and there was something broken in his eyes. "I needed to see you. Needed to say something. I don't want to hear it. Please. Just, please." The prison officer looked at me questioningly. I could refuse, could turn around and go back to my cell. But something made me sit down across from Dean, some need to understand. "I've been going over it all," Dean said quietly. "Every day since the accident. What we did to your brother. I knew it was wrong. I knew it the whole time. But I was scared of Marcus, scared of what would happen if I didn't go along with it. So I convinced myself it was necessary, that Tom had forced our hand. I told myself lies until I believed them. Why are you telling me this? Because you were right to do what you did. Because I deserved to die on that hillside. Because I'm a coward and you're not. He leaned forward, his voice urgent. I spoke to the police about everything. Not just about Tom, but about all of it. The money laundering, the other people Marcus hurt over the years. There were others, Sarah. Before Tom. We ruined lives, destroyed families. And I let it happen. I helped it happen. I felt something twist inside my chest. Does that make you feel better? Confessing? No. Nothing makes me feel better. I wake up every morning and I see your brother's face, the way he looked at us when he realized what we were going to do. The fear. The betrayal. Dean's voice broke. I'll see that face for the rest of my life. And I'll see your face too, on that hillside, when you chose to save me instead of letting me die. I didn't save you for you, I said harshly. I saved you because I couldn't become what you are. I know. But you did save me anyway. And now I have to live with what I've done. Every day, for the rest of my life. That's my sentence. Yours is 18 years, but mine is forever. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Dean reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table. I've been selling everything. My house, my car, everything Marcus couldn't seize. It's not much, but it's something. I've set up a trust in Tom's name. For his favorite charity, the one that helps recovering addicts. The one he used to volunteer at. I thought maybe that could be something. Something good to come from all this. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. You think money makes this right? No. Nothing makes this right. But doing nothing makes it worse. Dean wheeled himself back from the table. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that Tom mattered. That his death mattered. That it changed things. He left then, wheeling himself out of the room, the door closing behind him with a hollow click. I sat alone, staring at the envelope. After a long moment, I opened it. Inside was a bank statement showing a trust fund in Tom's name, worth nearly £200,000. And beneath that, a photograph. It was Tom, maybe 15 years ago, at the charity's opening day. He was smiling, his arm around another young man, both of them looking so hopeful, so convinced they could beat their demons and build better lives. I traced my finger over Tom's face, and for the first time since his death, I felt tears begin to fall. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for loss. For the future Tom would never have, for the life cut short, for all the Sunday lunches that would never happen. I cried for a long time in that small gray room, and when I was done, I folded the photograph carefully and tucked it into my pocket. It would be against the rules to keep it in my cell, but I'd find a way. I'd need something to hold on to during the long gray years ahead. When the prison officer came to take me back, I stood and walked with my head held high. I'd made my choices, and I'd paid for them. Tom's name had been cleared. Dean would spend the rest of his life trying to atone. And I would spend the next 18 years learning to live with what I'd done. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even really justice. But it was something like an ending, and that would have to be enough.